Welcome to Well Beyond Medicine, the world's top-ranked children's health podcast, produced by Nemours Children's Health. Subscribe on any platform at nemourswellbeyond.org or find us on YouTube.
Each week, we'll be joined by innovators and experts from around the world, exploring anything and everything related to the 85% of child health impacts that occur outside the doctor's office. I'm your host, Carol Vassar, and now that you're here, let's go.
Let's go, well beyond medicine.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Nemours Well Beyond Medicine podcast. With me, fresh from saving a baby porcupine, is Katie Coleman. She is a retired NASA astronaut, a public speaker, a mom, the author of a book called Sharing Space, An Astronaut's Guide to Mission, Wonder, and Making Change. She spent 6 months at the ISS on 3 different missions, I believe. Katie, we are so excited to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Well, I am very excited because, healthcare, especially, in my case, pediatric healthcare really played a great role in my life. And as somebody who got to go to space, I'm a living and breathing experiment.
Well, let's talk about your space experience and where it began. You and I are of a similar age. We're both late baby boomers. We witnessed the exponential growth of space in the 60s and 70s. It wasn't just seeing it on television, it was in the culture. We watched the Jetsons, and every kid I knew wanted to be an astronaut. What about you actually helped you to get to that place where you became an astronaut?
Well, everything that you said was, felt right to me, especially the Jetsons. I really loved that show.
Yeah.
And so the space program was everywhere, but the fact that I could be a part of it was completely not clear to me. And I had a dad who was in the diving business in the Navy. And so exploration was very real in our family, but the fact that I could be one of those people, it just wasn't the worlds that I saw. It wasn't the photos that I saw in a newspaper or things that I heard about. And so it wasn't until I was in college and as a junior, Sally Ride came, and Dr. Sally Ride, and gave a talk. And I remember the auditorium. I remember sliding into my seat. And I remember how it felt to listen to somebody that made me she just seemed so real that I just thought maybe I could try to do that. And that had never happened to me before.
And Dr. Sally Ride, for those who don't know, was the first American woman in space.
Correct.
Right. The inspiration for many people, yourself included. What was the path after that? You were in college, you were, I believe it was MIT, you continued on with graduate and postgraduate doctoral work. What then? How did you move on from there?
Well, the first thing I thought about was, I don't think that everybody has to go to MIT. I don't think it's that, it's that school everyone has to go to, but it was certainly a great place for me. And I think it is a great place. And I thought we have to have some astronauts. And so I looked in the alumni database and I contacted some of them to say I was interested and to, understand a little bit about what that was like. And at the same time, it seemed early to be like calling anybody because I needed to get my bachelor's degree. And it was clear that you needed, as a scientist, you needed an advanced degree, or you could go the pilot route and have your value be more in the flying business. I was going to be in the Air Force because they paid for school for me. I was ROTC. So my path was kind of clear in terms of where I'd be, but not necessarily what I would do and what I should try to make sure I got to do. And grad school turned out coming up earlier than I'd been told. And so I really liked chemistry of like things that you can really appreciate. And so I'm a polymer chemist. And our kid actually did have surgery when he was 4 days old. Oh. And then at 6 months old. And it was really interesting and amazing to me to see, this was then, I've already been an astronaut and this is, he's now 25. So it was in about 2000. And seeing all those small monitoring devices, seeing things that could be disposable, things that were plastic, things that were different kinds of plastic that could be used on very tiny babies. And so it made me proud of being in that materials kind of world.
It's interesting that you bring that up because I think people kind of forget that a lot of the innovations that we've had since the space program has been in existence is a result of the space program. I think Velcro came from the space program originally, but talk about how you've seen that grow in your time with the space program and since you left the space program.
Well, something that doesn't seem to change is that fascination that you spoke about just, that people are going to space. We want to know them. We want to understand what they're doing. And I think, and not just when people go, but when we send spacecraft so very far away and they send messages back and we learn things. And, I mean, there's some tough news. Pluto, that was tough, right? But, but but I think there's a sort of hope about the space program that it's just really compelling. And there's something very not fair about that. And that if we need a new kind of smaller computer for space, somebody is going to figure that out. And if we need to figure out cooling systems for our spacesuits, somebody's figuring that out. And on and on. And so the fact that things could be used for space is still a motivation, and I would say a technology accelerator. And I'm very proud of the fact that not everything that we do for future exploration, and there's very little that's only for that. Almost all of it has uses right back down here on Earth. Everything from, Chandra is an X-ray telescope, one of the families of great telescopes that we have, and literally tells us, in my words, everything that we've ever found out about black holes comes from this telescope as a basis. But it was finding out how to measure X-rays that really allowed us to advance X-ray technology down here on Earth for human health.
Let's talk a little bit about your work on the ISS. 3 different trips, 6 months total. There's technology that's being developed and research that's being done there that's benefiting healthcare down on Earth. Did you work with any of that, or was that kind of out of your realm?
Well, we all become sort of Jack and Jills of all trade, in all the trades, in that I'm originally a scientist and I needed to learn how to be an operational, pilot-like person that understood, make a plan and you can change the plan, but then at a certain point you can't change the plan anymore, and just really understanding, what it's like when everything you're doing is, sort of you're having a normal day in space, but it's always on the edge of life and death, I will say.
Right.
So you have to be ready for, what happens next? What do I do here? I felt like my laboratory experience prepared me to some degree from that. But flying airplanes, I mean, there's something that when you're ready, you have a checklist and you know what you're going to do. And for example, as an astronaut, I flew T-38s, which was really, for a chemist in the Air Force, this was really cool to get to do. They go faster than the speed of sound. But when that gas gauge drops to 0, there's something that happens to your whole body, your stomach. Everything kind of goes oof. And it gives me a little chills just to think about it. And then your job is to think and think about what you know and recognize what you need to recognize and realize that if the gas gauge goes to 0, should you jump out of the plane or is it the gauge that's broken? And you should communicate with the person in the other cockpit so that together you reach good decisions. And it's very much a team sport. So I learned from all those kinds of things. So we do all sorts of things. I actually had 2 shuttle missions, which I think are very much leading up to being on the space station.
Mhm.
And in fact, my first shuttle mission was to go on it was the longest shuttle mission at the time, where the laboratory was in the back of the payload bay, kind of like in the back of the dump truck. We'd go down this tunnel in the morning. I'd bring my lunch, and then I'd have different experiments all the time to do. Protein crystal growth for developing drugs, understanding crystal growth structures so that we can understand in a kind of, if you think of a drug as sort of a key that goes into a lock, you have to understand what the lock looks like.
Right.
And that those experiments are still happening because they're very, very helpful. And, you fast forward from being part of that shuttle mission, it's actually this patch on my sleeve here, and deploying that X-ray telescope, to then these 2 patches represent that almost 6 months up on the space station. And we did do different biological kinds of experiments. And I like to jump ahead from, I did some of the early plant growth. Growing plants, we'd like to have food on the way to Mars and on Mars. But more importantly, down here on Earth, There's a lot of places where it's hard to grow food,
Mm.
just no soil, maybe vertical farming in cities or in places where there's just not enough water. So in the space program, we learned a lot about those things. But I think that biology, biological chemistry, chemical biology, those are the terms you want to keep an eye on
Okay.
because up on that space station, it is a giant laboratory. And a woman named Kate Rubins is the first astronaut to sequence DNA up there. And what I'm going to say is might worry you. It worried me a little bit at first,
Okay.
where it seems like everything biological happens differently in a microgravity or almost weightless environment. And things that it's like if you're looking for, what is the active part of a disease or I'm not even going to name the correct part of a molecule or whatever, but what is the active part of that scientists should understand so they can design a vaccine or a drug. And up in space, what's active seems to get really more active. And so it's just easier planned, easier to measure. And, for, skin cells, our skin up in space gets kind of thin and sort of, it's a little bit like aging skin, but it gets and this is a very important barrier for humans, right? To disease and for their health. And our mouths, with our biofilms in our mouths are also important barriers. And what we're finding, meaning people who are studying some of those things up in space, is that the kinds of things that we're like, I wonder if that's the reason that skin gets thinner. I wonder if that's the reason that people are more vulnerable in terms of their immune system. When they bring those cells up to space, there's big differences and they're measurable, even in a few days. So then I thought, well, how come I didn't come back after 6 months with like 3 heads and weird and what I learned is that because I'm part of a system and we do, because everything is weightless, there's a lot of water weight and fluid that's down in the bottom part of your body. And if you look at people in space, even just today, you'll notice that they have sort of bigger cheeks, if you know them well, kind of a little bit. And it's because there's a fluid shift that happens right away. And it's the same fluid shift that happens to all of us when we lay down in bed and read a book and then suddenly go, oh, I guess I'm going to have to go to the bathroom before I go to bed. and so it's because, you're going to actually lose that fluid, right? And so our naturally hydrated state is less up there. Our heart muscles don't have to work as hard to move fluid around in our body because they're not fighting against gravity. So our heart muscles can act like aging hearts up there. And so there's a lot that we can learn. And I really think some of the work that I've been hearing about lately is we're actually taking stem cells up there, growing, I want to say organoids, and then testing drugs on them, drugs that take many weeks to understand whether they're being effective. Down here on the ground, they can actually see those results more like in a week or 2. And so learning early that a drug doesn't work to any of the researchers out there, that's invaluable to know that path, what can we learn from it?
It's interesting to get some insights into what's actually happening on the space station because I think people maybe are aware it's out there and it's floating around, it's going around the Earth, and maybe aren't sure what's actually happening. So thank you for those insights. I want to ask about not the science, but the human element. You were there for a long time, separated from family.
Not long enough.
Not long enough. You'd love to go back, I've read.
I would have stayed, And it's easy. Actually, I can actually say that because we had a situation where it was, a possibility. And I was like,
but there was family on the ground. You had a young son
Exactly.
at the time. Actually, you have 2 sons. One was a little bit younger. And the movie that you did, which was a Sundance movie, the name is, Space, The Longest Goodbye. You're featured with your son talking about that separation. And I would love for you to share what that separation was like and having some sort of support system from the Earth. How did that help you do your work, continue on the space station for the time that you did? And how can that inform people today as we head apparently towards Mars, manned missions to Mars?
Well, Um, it's hard. I said I'd stay longer if I could, and I would have, partly because once you get up there, it takes about a month to get good at the work up there, and then you just want to. You feel like I felt like every data point moves somebody's work, so much closer to understanding things, and so I really felt like it was the right thing to stay if that was offered or requested. And at the same time, I did have a 10-year-old waiting on the ground, as well as a husband and a 27-year-old as well, who was probably doing just fine without me. And actually, so was the 10. I mean, we missed each other greatly. And what we ended up doing was establishing a sort of different way of having a relationship. And we'd had some practice at that, in that Jamie's dad lived in Massachusetts. He's a glass artist. And I lived in Houston. And we went back and forth for many years. And then after we had a son, my other son is my stepson. And then our son thought that it was really normal to have 2 homes, 2 schools, 2 after schools, and some of their parents' friends who were really helpful. I mean, without that support system, I probably would not have gone. But I really felt that and we'd had some practice in doing this, but and I think a lot of people have experience in these feelings of what it would be like to be on a spaceship and not be able to be with your family. As we all went through COVID,
Right.
and I think you could actually even make the smaller comparison to somebody whose child needs to be in the hospital for an extended period of time. How do you bring the world to them? And how do you establish a way to have a relationship? And for my son Jamie and I, part of that came through reading. He loved these stories by a guy named Dave Barry and
Yep.
Ridley Pearson, called Peter and the Starcatchers. And I loved them because they had smart girls, smart boys, fairy dust, sword fight, everything that boys and girls would like were in those books. And by reading those books, we don't have to have the conversation. How was your day, Mom? How was your day, Jamie?
It was good.
No kid were. And I think that's can feel that way in a hospital room. Or I actually gave a graduation speech a couple of years ago to the one graduate from a high school on an island off the coast of Massachusetts, Cuttyhunk. And I said, you people here, you understand what it's like to live on a space station. And we'll need to understand those things going to Mars. And you can see that movie. It's actually a PBS Independent Lens production, and it's the most streamed. And I think it's because it puts the human back into human spaceflight. And you meet Caleb Barron. She's a submariner who lived on the space station. You meet all sorts of weird and strange theories of how we might make up for not being able to have a conversation with our family. I'm not so sure about some of them, but I think I'd have to change. You just have to work with what you have.
I watched the movie. I highly recommend getting it. It's on YouTube. You can rent it for about $3.99. It was wonderful, and brought some real insights into the idea that 3 years going to Mars is a long trip, and the psychological effects of that are going to be enormous. I want to go ahead.
Oh, can I just jump in that there's one of the measures where it's basically an avatar, and I call him husband guy, right? And then instead you can't really talk to your spouse without having 20 minutes each way or some delay. And then there was this weird looking virtual reality person, and they're like, you could have this person, and I'm like, yeah, I don't think so. But then, I'm a verbal person, clearly, and I partly figured things out by talking them through. And I think I probably would get something out of talking them through with substitute husband guy. So you have to be open-minded.
Watch the movie. You'll understand what we're talking about. You're also a musical person. You brought your flute to space. You played a duet with Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull. To what degree do you think it's essential to have music? I'm a musician too, readily available to you on the ISS. And how does that help create a creative personality that helps you sustain health and emotional well-being?
Everybody has their own way. I have crewmates who painted. I have crewmates that read books. I had crewmates that, would be on the ham radio talking with groups on the ground. Everyone has their own way of kind of like coming back to themselves in a day where you're constantly doing what's on the timeline and more. And it's just very busy, and you really agree. You're basically agreeing to be an operator all day long, and everybody has their own way. I do love music, and I think it's universal. I know it's universal. It's unstoppable, I think. And there's something about, and I get more comments about the flute playing. And I think it's because people are like, that could be me. I play. And, I'm an improvisational amateur flute player, but I love to play with people. And it's also a way to bring people with you up to the station. And so I brought flutes for an Irish band called the Chieftains. I brought Ian Anderson's flute and my own from the Powell Company down here in Massachusetts. And the flute, I don't know. Are you a flute player?
No, I'm a singer.
Oh, and I cannot do that. So together we should maybe get together. I really can't. But the flute comes in 3 pieces,
right?
And mouthpiece, and then the rest. And so I took the flute company's mouthpiece, and the rest of it was my flute. So I have a part that's mine, and I gave that part back to them. And they can, even beginners, put that mouthpiece in their flute and play the flute that went to space. And so it's a way, we talked about how the space program was compelling. And I think it's really only fair to try to get as many ripples out of that advantage that space has as we can. And one of those things is, by singing. I think having people sing along with you in space is what I would recommend.
Okay. If I were to go to space, I don't know if there's enough Dramamine in the world that could get me on a rocket.
I am a seasick person.
Really? Because I'm a carsick person.
Well, and everybody, I would say 75% of us don't feel well when we first get to space.
Okay.
And it depends what your job is, whether you're going to take some drugs I believe in science. I believe in medicine. And, when I fly and do experiments, they're really other people's experiments on that zero gravity airplane. And they have some great medicine for that. And I do it because I'm not going to be as good a data point if I don't. And so I believe in those things.
So there's hope for me yet.
Totally. And 3/4 of the people do not feel well or worse when they're up there.
I thought that would disqualify me immediately. So that's good to know.
Well, you try all those things on the ground. You try them out, but it's hard to predict. But it really does. Once you sort of adapt to this world, and flying from place to place becomes just what people do.
And as people fly into space again, SpaceX, going to the moon again, going to Mars at some point, children are hearing about this like we did as children, to kind of bring that full circle. How are you looking at STEAM education, which is science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics as it currently stands? What do you like? What maybe do you think could be improved?
Well, adding that A into STEM is essential, and making it STEAM. And that is because you could have the best idea in the whole world, but you're probably not going to have all the resources that you need. And that's, money, it's people to do some of the things that you can't do or shouldn't do once, those things are easy. I mean, nobody's going to do big things alone. They're just not. And to recruit the other players, you have to be able to tell them a story that makes them understand where they fit or could fit in that story. And I wrote my book, with another writer. We wrote together. And I did that because, there's an art to writing. And I wanted my book to really bring people to space with me. And I learned a lot from that writer, Ellen Daly. And so the arts are essential. And my husband is a glass artist, and he actually did space-related art 12 years before we ever met.
Really?
It got very expensive, so I had to get married. It's true. But, everybody explores in different ways. And when people imagine, well, okay, so maybe it's going to look like this, or I wonder what people will be doing down there. And the moon is coming soon.
Right.
The next Artemis mission, the first one went around the moon. Mm-hmm. And, on its little wings, on solar arrays, it had cameras looking at the spacecraft and then at the Earth. And when you see all those in one thing, and when a person sees that, it will change them, and they will come back, and they will change others. And the people that are on that mission are unimaginably wonderful. I'm not just saying that. They are just really wonderful folks. Their launch date, I think, is February 6th at this point.
Hmm.
And when everything's ready, that's when they'll go. And it's every step for itself. And I think Mars is in that picture too.
I hope that happens in my lifetime, that we get to Mars.
I think it will. Can I say one more thing about
Yeah.
the Mars part?
Yeah.
And that is that I know you have people out there that are doing research that other people have not envisioned that changes our lives. And I really value that research so much. And, I'm actually somebody who's good at the more incremental, okay, if you know this and we have this, maybe we could do that. But the people who take the really big leaps and think of something like so futuristic that the people just think, yeah, there's so many things wrong with that. I can't even start, right? We need those people who take big leaps. And SpaceX as a company, which is run by a woman named Gwen Shotwell, that company takes big leaps. And what I think something if you took from this podcast to notice is that most spacecraft are about, 20 feet in diameter. And this spacecraft is, boy, I just got this wrong. It's so big, and I want to say it's 9 meters. So it's 27 feet in diameter, whereas other spacecrafts are really more like in the early 20s. But when you make it so much bigger, so huge, just adding another pound or two, or can we have an exercise machine on the capsules we have now? Those are big questions. And do we all have to go on a diet? Those are big questions. But now they're launching spacecraft that are so big you could put 100 people in them. Right now, the spacecraft we have can take 4, maybe 6. And so when you scale like that, that's how, and you bring all those different perspectives to space, that's how you really get ahead. And so those things where you think they're impossible, your ideas that are big leaps ahead, just hire those artists and storytellers to tell the stories and keep going.
You sound like a Renaissance woman, the way I'm hearing. You've got the science, you've got the arts, you've got the saving porcupines, caring for others and caring for humankind and animal kind. And you've broken a lot of barriers throughout your career. What advice, as we close out today, do you have for young people who might have been told, hey, this is not your path, even though they want to pursue it?
Listen to that voice inside of you. The voice that just tells you, there's something. You don't even have to know what it is. You just need to know that there's something that you're supposed to be doing. And just realize that, it's still a world. For whatever reasons. Communication has made it a lot easier to have information and see others like yourself. And at the same time, it's still a world where as adults, and people who've gone to graduate school and go to be in academia with their ideas, realize that they're the only woman or one of very few, or the only person of color, or different things about you. You may feel alone, and realize that just look harder for company, because company is out there, and the world believes in you and your value and what you bring to the equation. So unfortunately, I think it is still harder than we'd like for everyone to be recognized for their capabilities. But that means that those of us that, have been recognized, there's so many stories in my book that involve other people, not women, other people that looked and realized, management is not seeing what Katie brings, and I am going to help them do that. We all have those people, and we need to be those people.
Final question. What excites you most about the future of space exploration today? And how can that inspire today's kids to dream about their own futures, whether it's science, arts, advocacy, wherever they end up going?
It's the optimism involved. We're now launching these giant spaceships. We have people living on a space station and doing research that can't be done on the ground. And, who thought that could be possible? So realize that the impossible really is possible. And that's really exciting to me because, I think of diseases that there was no hope for, and medical researchers have found paths to make improvements or cure them. it's so, it's exciting to me in a personal way, in a professional way. And so I'm just very optimistic. And I think space reminds us that those wild things that used to be cartoons like the Jetsons or Star Trek or Star Wars, I mean, they're happening and you could be a part of it, and your ideas are important.
Couldn't say it any better myself. Katie Coleman, retired NASA astronaut, author of Sharing Space, An Astronaut's Guide to Mission, Wonder, and Making Change. You have been a wonderful guest. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks very much.
Let's go.